It has been such a, I haven't cried this many times in one day in a long time. And they have been tears of every kind, of joy, of gratitude, of just being shaken to the core, not only of our citizenship, but of our humanity. And it's really been just something special today. I have the task, I've been asked to spend some time here to help us make meaning of our day and to do some stitching of some of the themes and some of the ideas and some of the opportunities for action that have emerged over the course of this day together. And I'm going to do that actually in a way that this kind of came to me as the day was unfolding, in a way that honors and echoes how we began this morning. We began with this wonderful surprise performance by Yo-Yo Ma and Condoleezza Rice, and they played three pieces. And without a whole lot of explanation, Yo-Yo said, you know, we've got three pieces that will convey three different ways in on how to feel or how to be. And so I thought, actually, as I was gathering my impressions of this day, that I would cluster them into three pieces, three angles of entry to this topic. Before I enter into them, let me just say a word about, a word of gratitude. In the first place, as Deborah has been so generous in saying, I run an organization called Citizen University that has been fortunate to be a partner with the Kennedy Center here and with Deborah and Mario and the incredible team here. And we're just really grateful to be on this journey, not only with them, but with everybody here in this room. Our work at Citizen University is about really trying to foster a culture of powerful citizenship. And I think it's worth taking a moment just to say, when we say citizenship, as we've been saying all day here, I don't mean documentation status under the immigration and naturalization laws of the United States. I mean membership in the body. I mean the deeper ethical sense of being a contributor to this common endeavor. And it's in that spirit that I want to share these three takes on our day as a segue into our calls to action. So the first take is Kennedy ideals. We actually, I'm not sure Deborah this morning mentioned it, but she has been taking most opportunities in this centennial year of John F. Kennedy's birth. And you probably have seen in the hallways the kind of banners showing not only the image of JFK, but listing these 5 Kennedy ideals that not only the man embodied, but are indeed kind of animating for the Kennedy Center here. They are indeed, I think, actually written on our lanyards for our name tags. And the ideals are courage, freedom, justice, service, and gratitude. And I thought one really great way to think about this day thus far has been literally just to process them through these Kennedy ideals. Because when you think about courage in the first place, we heard this morning not only a reference to Profiles in Courage, to then Senator Kennedy's book about politicians who in the past had taken risks, made choices that put themselves at risk and that required an expenditure of some kind of political capital and therefore courage. But we've been thinking more broadly about what it means to be courageous in civic life in this time right now, as citizens, as artists, as citizen artists. And I think this theme of courage is one that's kind of easy to get a little bit, I guess, cliche about. And I wanted to put a finer point on it because people all throughout the day have been putting a finer point on it. What does it mean to exercise courage in public and civic life? It means, in the first place, to be willing to resist conventional wisdom, to resist the architecture and the narrative of power, and to resist the tides of behavior and attitude and norms that lead so many people outside of this room, but so it leads so many of our fellow Americans to say, well, that's the way it is because that's the way it is. Courage is resisting that tide through art, through politics, through simple presence. And courage is also, as Paul Stebbins said in the panel this morning, a matter of being able and willing to resist certitude. It takes some courage in these political times, these very polarized times, these times of great righteousness on every side. It takes courage to resist certitude. And I'm not sure there are better humans on earth who who are better at teaching us and reminding us how to resist certitude than artists and people who work in art and who show us all the ways in which there's no such thing as a single story. But the other dimension of courage is simply this: sacrifice, which is a word that is so, even when JFK was giving his inaugural address, that kind of 14-minute stentorian speech that David Rubenstein was admiring this morning, even then, 1961, there was already cynicism in the air about that kind of earnest, almost Roman Republic ethic of ask not, right? Even then, it was already getting people were getting a little cynical about the idea of sacrifice. You fast forward now several decades, and we don't talk about sacrifice. But I think in the context of citizen artists, we know here people who are artists are most often asked to sacrifice. To sacrifice a living, to sacrifice recognition, to sacrifice the stability and certainty of professional paths. For what? Right? It's the voice of many parents in many people's heads in this room. For what? Right? Artists teach the rest of us what it means to live with purpose. Artists teach citizens what it means to be willing to make sacrifices for some common purpose that's greater than just oneself. So that's courage. Freedom. One of the things that struck me so much throughout this day, again, particularly during the morning session, was this recurring theme about our interdependence. This recurring theme about the impossibility of, as we heard in that piece called Obstacles, that piece that was the second time I cried hard today watching that piece, that we are all handcuffed to each other. There is no such thing as someone else's problem. There's no such thing as cabining off my fate from yours. There's no such thing as saying, I'm free, I don't have to worry about you. That is not actually freedom. That is sociopathy. Freedom is recognizing that we were bound together in these webs of relationship and obligation, and the other word that's been used throughout this day, which is trust. Freedom is trust. Freedom is responsibility. Even etymologically, the difference between freedom and liberty is worth noting. Right? Americans often use those two words interchangeably, but liberty has a Latin derivation that is really about not being enslaved. The state of not being enslaved. That is the root of the idea of liberty. Freedom has its roots in the language of Germanic tribes, Old Norse tribes. And it's the same root that gives us the word friend. It is about the bonds of trust and affection that keep us from dying isolated in the woods, that allow us to help each other so that together we may be free, so that together we may express the full depth of our creative imagination and our artistic potential in every medium possible. Justice. So we've heard a lot from different organizations here, whether it's Turnaround Schools, whether it's Mikvah Challenge, whether it's Harmony KC, all these organizations all around the United States, El Sistema, that are using art not only to educate, not only to illuminate, but to enact justice. And that's kind of the point of citizenship, to enact justice. And I think not only is it the case that the enactment of justice isn't the monopoly or the private preserve of politicians, it is in fact quite the case that the enactment of justice begins long before politicians and lawyers ever get to it, begins with the moral imagination of artists. Artists and people who support artists are the people who draft the blueprints for justice in every society at every time. Every social movement that ever added up to anything in the life of this country began with the imagination and the curiosity of artists. Service. Well, again, you can say a lot of organizations here in this room are deploying and activating artists in service of their communities, sometimes literally in terms of national service and being connected to AmeriCorps, other times more figuratively. But I actually want to call out a different notion of service here. Again, returning back to something that Paul Stebbins said in this morning's panel conversation. He used a term of art that maybe to many folks here just seemed like a rhetorical 3 words, but actually to anybody who knows the law of corporations, the world of business, the phrase duty of care, which Paul used a couple times today, actually means something. It doesn't mean just, you ought to care, right? It is a legal, it is a moral obligation of stewardship. If you are an officer of a corporation, if you hold the great office that, for instance, the man who's being honored today or tomorrow with the Profiles in Courage Award, former President Barack Obama, says his job title now is citizen. If your office is citizen, you have a duty of care. You have a duty of care that is not just about looking out for yourself, but is about understanding the ways in which, if you have the sight to anticipate a problem, if you have the insight to sense where things are going wrong or unraveling in a community, you have a duty to actually say, hey folks, we got to deal with this. And again, who are the canaries in those coal mines but the artists among us? That's what service means. It is stewardship. Finally, then, gratitude. So, one of the great themes running throughout this day has been the theme. Yo-Yo said it earlier. I think the way he put it was, how do we go from we need to we give? Right? And I'm sure, maybe not so much to people in this room, because we're all part of a certain tribe, but to people literally right outside the door, the immediate knee-jerk reflection is, man, that is so naive. Go from we need to we give, right? Humans always need. They always think about what they need first before they think about what they give. Okay, that is true in part, right? And that relates to a deeper theme that was running throughout this day of what is self-interest and how are we wired neurologically to be always pursuing our self-interest, right? To be acting out of fear. If we grow up in poverty or in situations of abuse and our hippocampus begins to shrink and we begin to live in these scarcity mindsets that are not just metaphorical mindsets, that are literally scarcity mindsets in the shrinking and wiring of the matter of our brain, right? When we're in those modes, we don't think about what we want to give, we think about what we need. But I think one of the great lessons of life is that the most sure and durable way to get what you need is to give. That these are the bonds that make us free. And that having a mindset that says, I give, not because I'm a blind, foolish altruist. I give because I believe in mutuality. I believe in the best sense that what goes around comes around. I believe that we are woven in this fabric of relationship and obligation. And that theme has been woven throughout the day from all of our speakers and all of our performers and artists. And it is a notion of gratitude to remember that we have an incredible gift at all times, that most of the time we kind of heedlessly, mindlessly, unwittingly throw away. And that gift is called power. Every one of us is endowed with far more power, by which I mean simply a capacity to ensure that others do as you would like them to do. Right? We are endowed with far more power than we ever recognize, whether in artistic life, in political life, in economic life. And part of the job of the artist and the citizen artist is to reawaken us to the full breadth and dimension of the power that we sometimes heedlessly give away, but that we could actually activate if we mindfully directed and circulated toward the ends that we wanted to direct it toward. That's my first take, 5 Kennedy ideals. Here's a second take. Here's the second piece. I originally called it How to Be Human, but actually watching CJ and her company perform, I will call it now How to Be More. How to be more. Here's some themes that have come up today about how to be more. Live in joy. Create rituals and collective experiences that make the work of citizenship and the work of art and the work of supporting both not eat your vegetables, do your duty, but join the party, join the club, join the tribe. Joy. Perform power. Right? So one of the great colloquial sentences of fake it till you make it is pretty darn applicable to civic life and to making change in civic life, right? It's not when I say fake it till you make it, that's not a knock on expertise. It's not a knock on the 10,000 hours it takes to be able to compose music or play the cello or do slam poetry that wins you national championships. Fake it till you make it is simply, if you don't feel powerful, fake it. Assert power, perform power, claim power, literally in the way that we were just asked by CJ to raise our arms and open up our posture like this, right? Some of you have seen the great TED Talk by Amy Cuddy about these literal physical power poses. When you stand in this pose like this, you feel like nobody's going to mess with you, right? And when you take this pose here, you create a self-fulfilling story of invitation for people to mess with you. Perform power. Perform it as artists, perform it as citizens, perform it as people just moving in the world all the time. And when we together start faking it, we together will make it. Here's another theme about how to be more. Various articulations of it. One was cross-disciplinary. One was kind of fusion, art and science, STEM and STEAM. But my friend Todd Mackover, who is himself an embodiment of the fusion of art and science, put it best in the language that he and his colleagues at the MIT Media Lab use, that they went from a language or a phrasing of multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary to anti-disciplinary, anti-categories, anti-boxes, right? We've heard that theme all day long, anti-boxes. And that idea of being against boxes and mindful of the ways in which we are constantly putting each other into boxes. Red, blue, one of 5 races, this region, that region. You know, either you're a scientist or you're an artist. Either you're someone who uses your imagination or someone who actually works for a living. Right? These boxes that people put us into are nothing but prisons that we willingly, most of the time, walk right into. Voice. One of the things actually that Todd showed in his presentation in the panel that he was just part of was some of the joyous, creative products that he and his team at the MIT Media Lab are creating. And one of them is this little orb, he called it, this little thing that you hold that somehow translates literally your voice into modulated vibrations that you feel in your hand or that someone else can feel, right? And anytime we're with someone we love and we're back to back with them, and one of you goes, and the other one of you feels that deep in your chest, right? Like, that's what Todd and his team are creating in a way that physically doesn't have to be about us being that proximate. And you think about that tool and you realize that tool itself is a metaphor for what it is that we're all doing here. We are trying to make our voice into vibrations that other people feel, and that changes the way they see the world. That is art and that is politics. Can you find your voice? Can you hone your voice? Can you find the pitch and the frequency on which your voice is strongest? Can you capture it and embody it in a way that makes someone else feel like, dang, I want to be part of that vibration? Yes, that is called Occupy Wall Street. That is called the Tea Party. That is called $15 Now. That is called the Dreamers. That is called the Bernie Sanders campaign. That is called the Donald Trump campaign. That is called Black Lives Matter. That is called this age that we are living in right now of incredible voice finding and bottom-up citizen power being generated from across the left and the right, and at every turn with the imagination and creativity and the participation, and indeed the leadership of artists. Another theme in the category of how to be more. Endure. Endure. So I told Mario saw me after the dance performance that we saw before we broke for lunch today, called Obstacle. man, I could not move. I could not move. I'd been crying through the whole thing. And you watch that performance, and you watch that kind of Sisyphean life story unfold in front of you, right? She wasn't pushing a boulder up the hill, but she was always trying to get ahead of and around and on top of and over that embodiment of her disease, right? And it reminded me as I watched that of something that we'd been hearing earlier in the day in thinking about what David Rubenstein said about what endures most from any nation is not the record of its battles or economic achievements or its kind of political contests. What endures most is the spirit of its civilization. It's art. That is what endures. And these double senses of endure, number one, to suffer through, and number two, to last. These are at the heart of being human. These are at the heart of being more. These are at the heart of being a citizen artist. How do you suffer through and translate that suffering into a way that, without words, can make every other human in the room cry? And then how do you convert that moment of connection into creation, a creation that will outlive every single one of us? John F. Kennedy, as some of you know, was a little bit obsessed, actually, with his own mortality. He had premonitions, and that's partly because he had many deep physical ailments that back then in the culture of the press, the public knew nothing of particularly. He had risen to the presidency because the anointed one in his family, Joe Kennedy, had died in the Second World War. He had siblings. He had a sister whose condition of mental illness and intellectual deprivation had led her to be not only lobotomized, but essentially put into a category that was invisible to the family and to the public. So John F. Kennedy, by the time he was a United States Senator, and by the time he was writing Profiles in Courage, and by the time he was thinking about running for president, had a deep familiarity with pain, mortality, futility, and the evanescence of everything. Right? It's part of what made him so cool, right? You look back at old videos of a film of John F. Kennedy, and you're always struck by how cool he was, right? You have that kind of cool not just because he had that cool not just because he had survived hot things, like the Second World War and being on a PT boat that got severed in half by a Japanese destroyer, right? He had that kind of cool because he was familiar with death. He was familiar with the depths of life. And for us to be more, as citizen artists, is to take that spirit, that full spectrum spirit of knowing just who we are and just how short our time is here, and to try to create something that endures and to harness it into artistic life and civic life, especially in a moment right now, like right now, where the question is in the air, will America endure? Will this republic live another generation? Will this experiment survive one more round? Or are we Rome? Are we done? Is the music we hear not the fruits of our great civilization, but Nero fiddling while things burn? Endurance. My third and final piece, which is short, on the take of this day. Power. So I defined power earlier as this capacity to ensure that others do as you would like them to do. And I know to many of you that might sound kind of menacing or evil and distasteful. And if it does, I sincerely, earnestly invite you to get over it. Because one of our jobs here as citizen artists is to get really comfy with the idea of power. To not treat power as something that everyone else has over there that they use to lord over us and put us in these boxes of scarcity and put us in these boxes of second-class treatment. But power is something that we have, that we let lie fallow, that we throw away, that we give away, but that if we are awake and aware and alive, we can indeed activate. And there's a very simple formula that I use when I talk about power, which is this: P plus CH equals CI. This is my nod to the science part of our day, although this is hardly actual science. P plus CH equals CI, which translates as power plus character equals citizenship. Being fluent and literate in power, by which I mean, do you know how to get stuff done? Do you know how to get not just funding for your nonprofit, but do you know how to change policy in your community? Do you know how to get people elected or unelected? Do you know how to mobilize people power, money power, ideas power, social norms power, reputational power, state power, the power of force and physical presence? Are you familiar with these ways of thinking about power? Do you have this literacy? If you don't, you've got work to do, because this is the time where our country is asking us to get literate in a hurry. If you do understand these things, if you do know in any situation, you walk into a place like the Kennedy Center and you kind of spend some time and you read the map, you read the room, you realize, okay, I got it. I can figure out who decides, right? Because that is the core question of all power in civic life, is who decides? Who decided that it should be this room and not another room? That it should be this group of several hundred people and not another group of several hundred people? Who decides, right? So if you have that literacy, that's great. But if all you have is a literacy in power, if all you know are the strategies and tactics of how to get other people to do what you want them to do, and that literacy in power is uncoupled from any moral sense, then all you are, again, is a highly, exquisitely attuned and skillful sociopath. That you've got to couple that literacy in power with this sense of what I call character in the collective. When I say character, I'm not talking about individual virtue like perseverance or diligence or honesty. Those things are important. What I'm talking about is, how do we live in the company of others? How do we create in the company of others? How do we imagine in the company of others? With mutuality, with respect, with more than tolerance, but with a faith actually that diversity yields hybridity, which yields life. Right? That if we have that kind of character and those kinds of values, which you can think of as Kennedy ideals, or you can think of simply as how to be more or how to be human, when you have that coupled with a literacy in power, then you can now start showing up as a citizen. You can now start putting on that jacket, that uniform, and say, yeah, I hold the office. I hold the office of citizen artist, of creator of this republic. And our task now, the rest of this day, the rest of this afternoon, is to be thinking about, okay, as I hold that office, what are the things that I'm going to do to convert all of the experience, the learning, the inspiration, the new relationships and friendships that I've made over the course of this day so far? How am I going to plow them into projects that make a difference in our world right now, that are trying to express these very ideas of what it means to be a citizen artist? We have, as Tina is about to explain to us in a moment, we have a variety of projects teed up here to get your juices flowing. But I have a feeling as the course of the afternoon goes that you're not going to get contained by these boxes. And that what you're going to do is to be thinking about how the dots you're putting on the table here are going to connect to what you bring back to Wynwood, or to the Bay Area, or to Chicago, or to Dallas, or to Seattle, or to Cambridge, or wherever. And so I invite you, as we begin this next section of our day, to think in this same mode. Think about what it means to be a citizen artist, and to think there's no single answer to it. I just gave you 3 takes, 3 easy pieces on citizen artistry. You've got your own piece. Let's start composing together.